This is an experiment in which we're trying to learn more about the way people can control their galvanic skin response. What we're going to do is hook you up to this instrument which will record your galvanic skin response, and once we'll have you try and control it while we allow you to see this meter which will show you what your responses are. And then once we'll have you try and control these responses without any biofeedback. In that way we can learn if the biofeedback is really essential for people to learn and control the galvanic skin response. My first introduction to biofeedback was while I was a graduate student at Indiana University in Bloomington. I was very interested in methods by which people could modify the responses of their autonomic nervous system. You know, responses like your heart rate, sweating, stomach activity. Up until that time, which was about 1960, people had thought that these were just responses, that is, things that could not be modified through your voluntary control. And while I was in Bloomington, I had the opportunity to observe something that I really found fascinating and always think back to. And that took place at a hospital in Indianapolis, where children were being taught to regain the use of muscles that had been damaged in polio. These were children now who could no longer make a simple movement like that. Their muscles had been so damaged while they had polio that now all they could do was sit in their chair with their arms at their sides. The problem that the physical therapist had was how to get the child to go like this, maybe 500 times a day. The children just wouldn't do it. And apparently the reason was that they had no feedback. What I mean by that is this. The child was told, grunt and groan, do whatever you can, but move that muscle, build that muscle up. And the child would go like this, but absolutely nothing happened as far as the child was concerned. He couldn't see any change, he couldn't feel any change. And then a psychologist working with this group had an idea. The children needed to know that they were, each and every time, getting a little stronger, and a little stronger. So what he did was put 2 electrodes on the muscle that was damaged, that the children were trying to rebuild, and record the electrical activity, take the wires that were attached to these electrodes to an amplifier, amplify the signal so that the signal was now strong enough coming from the muscle, and then use that amplified signal to light up a clown's face that he very cleverly devised, something that he thought the children would find interesting. Now, each time the child tried to move the arm, tried to work that muscle, even though there wasn't enough activity for you to see some activity here, there was enough activity to be picked up by the electrodes, and then when that signal was amplified, it could light up the clown's face. And each session of therapy, the therapist would make a slight adjustment on his amplifier so that the child had to exert a little more effort and a little more effort in order to light up that clown's face. And I thought that was really ingenious, because after doing this for just a couple of days, the children were working and working and working, and the point was they still, in many cases, could not see any change in their body. They couldn't actually see the arm move, or they certainly could not see their bicep bulge. But what they could see was a form of external feedback, namely this clown's face in front of them, that when they did the right thing, namely exerted enough physical effort, the clown's face would light up. And that's what we mean by biofeedback. Biofeedback really refers to any method of presenting people with external signals or displays to let you know about some bodily change, some biological change. That's, of course, why we call it biofeedback, biological feedback, providing you with information about some internal goings-on. And I thought to myself, well, if people could be trained to bring about muscle changes in this way by simply letting them know what's going on inside the muscle, even when the activity was too low to be otherwise seen, I thought, well, maybe if we provide people with biofeedback of an autonomic nervous system response, such as heart rate, or sweating, or stomach activity, that we could help people to gain control over these responses, which were previously thought to be involuntary. This device that's been sitting on my desk is a galvanic skin response meter that has been made specifically for demonstrations and talks about this work. This instrument measures basically changes in resistance of the flow of current from small batteries in here along these wires through the electrodes and through my skin. The more anxious I am, the less resistance my skin will offer to the flow of current through me and back into the meter. So if we attach these electrodes to my fingers and turn it on, we can then see and hear whether my skin resistance is going up or going down. The more my skin resistance goes down, the more anxious I would be, and the more my skin resistance goes up, the more relaxed I am. This is an experiment in which we're trying to learn more about the way people can control their galvanic skin response. What we're going to do is hook you up to this instrument which will record your galvanic skin response, and once we'll have you try and control it while we allow you to see this meter which will show you what your responses are, and then once we'll have you try and control these responses without any biofeedback. In that way we can learn if the biofeedback is really essential for people to learn to control the galvanic skin response. When you're trying to control your response, if the needle on the meter goes in this direction, that's a GSR. So when I tell you, okay, now try and make responses, that means make the needle go this way. And when I tell you to just relax and suppress your GSR, then you're trying to make the needle go in this direction. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to put on the electrodes. These electrodes can't hurt you in any way. They're simply recording your responses, but you can't get shocked or anything like that. I hold them on with these double sticky collars, as we call them, that I'm putting on here. We put a little electrode paste in there. This is just to make good electrical contact between your skin and the electrodes. I just take off this protective white paper. Then we have the double sticky collar that will hold the electrode to your finger. Say we'll put one right there. And we'll put the other one on this finger. It doesn't really matter which finger we put them on, but we put them on your fingertips so that we come in contact with those sweat glands that are particularly sensitive to emotional kinds of stimuli. Now, when I say to you to make GSRs, think about arousing thoughts, whatever is for you an arousing thought. And when I say to suppress GSRs, think about things that are very relaxing. Okay? Okay, now we're going to start with a no feedback session, and so I'll turn on this recorder so I have a permanent record, and I'm going to turn this unit away from you so that you cannot see this meter. And then I want you for 1 minute to try and make responses, and then for 1 minute when I tell you to try and suppress responses. Okay, begin by making responses for me as best you can. When one thinks thoughts which are sufficiently arousing, this will bring about increased activity of the autonomic nervous system. And when this happens, there will be an increase in sweating in the palms and a decrease in skin resistance. And this decrease in skin resistance is what we call a GSR, a galvanic skin response. The reason why I became interested in teaching people to control their GSR is that much research has shown that the GSR is one of the most sensitive measures of anxiety in human subjects. And we thought that if we could teach people to control their GSR, perhaps at the same time we will help them to ease or alleviate some of their anxieties. Stop now. This will be a no feedback trial, and this time I want you to just try and relax and suppress your GSR responses. Without feedback, it is sometimes difficult to know what areas of thought are for you truly relaxing. Some individuals find that they can't control their GSR the very first session, but if we bring these people back 2, 3, even 4 sessions, we find that by then most people can gain some degree of control over their GSR. Okay, you can stop now. This will be a feedback trial. You are to watch the meter and try and make as many GSR responses as you can. By using the meter to get feedback, one can tell which thoughts are sufficiently arousing to produce GSRs. Many people think that sexual thoughts will be for them the most arousing, or that is, they feel that by thinking sexual thoughts they will produce GSRs. In one experiment I did with professional actors and actresses, they found that thoughts of death, surprisingly enough, were much more arousing, produced many more GSRs than thoughts of sexual activities. Okay, stop. This is a feedback trial, but I want you to simply relax and try and suppress your responses. One application of GSR biofeedback training would be to help overly reactive or underreactive individuals. Some investigators are trying to help these individuals by using feedback of autonomic nervous system responses, such as heart rate and galvanic skin response. And others are working with central nervous system responses, such as muscle potential and brainwave activity. Now, one area that has received a lot of attention in the press is brainwave activity. Normally, when you're awake, paying attention to something, working away at some task, your brainwave activity is low amplitude, and very fast. You might think of it like this. Now, when you're more relaxed, awake, but relaxed, then your brainwave activity is large amplitude, high amplitude, and slower. This is what we call alpha activity. Alpha activity when you're more relaxed, beta activity when you're actually working at some task. Some people discovered that people who are relaxed show a lot of alpha activity. This was found for some people who meditate. This is found for some people who practice not only meditation but various religious practices. When they are in that particular state, they show a lot of alpha activity. So people thought, perhaps if we can train subjects to get into alpha more readily, more frequently, for longer periods of time, it might help these people relax. So using biofeedback, providing people with signals from the brain. This is, of course, central nervous system activity, but it is not activity that you are aware of. You could not tell me for sure whether you were at this moment in alpha or in beta or in some other state, because you can't tell for sure what your brainwave activity is. Therefore, if I tell you, okay, get into alpha now, you might try and relax, but you don't know whether you are relaxing sufficiently to put yourself into alpha state. But if we provide you with some form of feedback, from a meter or an oscilloscope or a counter or just a simple on-off of a light, we can tell you, we can signal to you when you are in alpha and when you are not. And in this way, you can learn what kind of internal sensations or thoughts or ideas go with being in alpha. And then when you want to put yourself in an alpha state, you can simply sit back, relax, and go back to those particular sensations or feelings that you had when the biofeedback told you that you were indeed in alpha.
In this study, we're going to measure your ability to produce alpha waves. I'm going to attach 2 electrodes to your head, and they'll pick up the electrical activity, which we call EEG, that your brain gives off. Now, we're going to measure you under 2 conditions. In the first, you will not receive any feedback. You'll just try to produce alpha waves on your own. In the second condition, we'll give you feedback, and you'll hear a tone every time your brain produces alpha. Now just relax, and I'll attach 2 electrodes. I'm going to scrape the back of your scalp a little just to make a good electrical contact for the electrode.
What we are doing here is really quite similar to what we showed earlier in terms of GSR control. In this case, we are using alpha control. We are feeding back information about the subject's brainwave activity, and the subject is using this information to control or lower his general state of arousal. In the earlier study, our subject used feedback of GSR to try and control her general level of arousal.
And this headband will keep the electrode in place. And now one on your earlobe. Just plug you into the amplifier now. Okay, now until I say stop, I'd like you to keep your eyes closed now. And whatever way you can, just try to produce alpha waves. Okay. Now in this condition of the experiment, we're going to feed your signal into a neuroanalyzer. Every time your brain is in alpha, you'll hear a tone. So just try to keep the tone going as much as possible, okay?
Okay.
Okay, keep your eyes closed now.
Prior to biofeedback, the only methods available involve giving of certain drugs, but drugs can always have bad side effects. The drug might help the heart problem, but it might make the person very sleepy, or it might bring about some other problem that the physician might decide is worse than having the irregular heartbeat. The beauty of biofeedback is there are no side effects. I don't know of anyone who's ever died of an overdose of biofeedback, and that's something to think about. So, if you have an irregular heartbeat, we might somehow monitor from you, record from you, your heartbeat. That's always the crucial thing. We must be able to record from you the particular physiological measure that we are interested in trying to help you control. So, with heartbeat, there are many ways. We can put electrodes on your chest or on your arms and legs and record the heartbeat, or we can use a device that picks up the pulse from your finger. As you well know, every time your heart beats, blood rushes to all parts of the body. And at one point in time, the blood will rush into your finger. Then the blood will slowly leave the finger, and then a second later, the blood will go into your finger again. If you could actually see the size of your finger through a magical magnifying glass, you would see that every time your heart beats, your finger gets larger. Then it gets smaller. Next time your heart beats and the blood surges down it, your finger gets larger again, and then smaller. Well, that's not a very good way to provide people with biofeedback of their pulse, to have them look at their finger with a magnifying glass. But there are many other ways that modern technology has found to provide people with feedback of their pulse or heart rate, which, as I've explained, is really the same thing. And one way I can show you very quickly right now. This is just one of several ways that we can record people's pulse rate. This is a portable device, picks up the pulse from my finger and displays it to me in one of three ways. A light blinks, and that light, every time that light blinks, that means my heart is beating. It displays the information to me on a meter in terms of the number of times my heart is beating per minute. And we can hear a beat, an audible beat, that signals to me, if I don't want to look at the device, just how often my heart is beating. The way this device works, briefly, is as follows. In this little device that I clamped on my finger, there is a small light and a photocell, much like you would use in photography, that is sensitive to light. When I put my finger in there, the light bounces off my finger and back down into the photocell. And the more blood there is in my finger, the more light is reflected back down into the photocell. And then along these wires, the change in resistance coming from the photocell, which, remember, is a function of the amount of light bouncing back into the photocell, which is a function of the amount of blood in my finger. This information is carried back to this meter, and the electronics inside converted to the beat, the flashing light, and the display, which tells us the number of times per minute that my heart is beating. Actually, the display reads in numbers like 6, 7, and 8, and we know we just have to multiply that by 10, and then we know the number of times per minute that my heart is beating. My interest in biofeedback is really as a basic researcher. I'm interested in learning more about how people can control the responses of the autonomic nervous system, and biofeedback is one very good way that we have been studying for the past approximately 10 years. Now, some of my colleagues and graduate students here at Penn State, as well as researchers across the country, are very much interested in applying this information to actual clinical problems. That is, to helping people who have psychosomatic problems, problems that are physical in nature but have a very large psychological component. Right now, there are people studying such things as hypertension, high blood pressure, and using biofeedback to help people with this problem. There are researchers studying Raynaud's disease. Raynaud's disease is characterized as a disease where people suffer from pain in their toes and their feet. In their toes of their feet, their hands, they get so cold that they're actually painful. And there are people studying the use of biofeedback with migraine headaches and with tension headaches, which is something slightly different. I'm interested in studying stomach motility and learning more about how we can control stomach motility and in that way help people to get over various psychosomatic stomach problems. It has been found that people suffering from epilepsy can avoid seizures if they can get their brainwave activity to be approximately 12 cycles per second. And through the use of biofeedback, these people, including young children, have been trained to get their brainwave activity right at 12 cycles per second, and in this way to hold off seizures. If biofeedback as a research approach and a method of treatment can indeed survive biofeedback as a fad, I think that we will really have a new way of conceptualizing the workings of the human body.